body. Okay. The October 7th, 2014 meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council Finance Committee will now come to order. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on topics not on today's agenda? Seeing none, let us go to the first item.
Chair Francisco and council members, we are here today to talk about the municipal golf course. We have come to you several times over the last few years just to let you know that we are having increasing financial challenges, so we're back with an update on that. I want to introduce myself, whom you already know, Nancy Rapp, Parks and Recreation Director, but I also want to introduce to you Mark Sewell, who is our new business analyst in Parks and Recreation. 50% of Mark's time is spent on the golf course, which has been a tremendous asset for us, and 50% of his time is spent with managing the department's overall budget. So it's been a significant enhancement for us. So the city's municipal golf course, we have one municipal golf course, and it has served the community of Santa Barbara for 56 years. It is an enterprise fund, and the structure is such that we have city employees providing the golf course maintenance, and we have two concessionaires. One is a food and beverage concessionaire, Mulligan's, and the other is the Pro Shop Director of Golf Concession, which is the entity that actually runs the day-to-day operation of the golf course for the golfers. In our presentation today, we've got some slides to show you golf trends. We're going to talk both about national and then local trends. We're going to share with you a fiscal overview with some projections, talk about what our response to date has been to the financial challenges, talk about beginning the discussion of options for consideration, and then next steps. So nationally and regionally, we are experiencing what other golf courses are experiencing. So there continues to be a decline in golf as a sport. This has been going on for several years. Several reasons. Number one, fewer people are interested in golf, so fewer new golfers. Existing players are playing less frequently for a couple of reasons, one being financial, the other being, this is probably the larger reason, the amount of time that it takes to play golf in today's busy world. We also, the golf industry experienced an overexpansion of golf courses in communities. We have certainly felt the impact here locally of the addition of new golf courses to this community as compared to what we had for many years. And more recently, we've seen the recession impacts, and one of the things that we certainly have been experiencing here is that with the recession impacts, fewer people choosing to spend money on recreation in general, but golf specifically, we have had more competition for those who are playing. So the golf industry has been talking a lot about a lot of the promotional and fee discounting that's been going on throughout the industry in an effort to capture the revenue, but it's a downward slope. And so we've been very aware of that. And the projections nationally are that it will be flat, potentially grow 1% to 2%. But again, that's national. For Santa Barbara Golf Club, our local market has certainly gotten a lot more competitive, and higher-end courses have been reducing their price point to capture more of the players. Thus, they're a growing competition for our golfers. Ventura recently renovated 2 of their municipal golf courses, so a lot of people that used to travel up to Santa Barbara are playing down in Ventura. And we had 2 major construction projects out at the golf course in 2010, and that because of that, we saw a real decline in play that we have yet to fully recover from. And we have seen a decline in our play recently, particularly since May. We think partly due to the dry conditions of the golf course, although the golf course looks pretty good. So we're not really understanding all the reasons why play is down for the last few months, when last year we were seeing an increase over the previous year, month on month. And this chart really shows you the decline in play over years. So you can see that in 1985, we reached our peak of 114,000 rounds. And when you go all the way over to the right-hand side, you see the last 5 years we've been relatively stable, and we have been between a low of 59,000 rounds, which was the year that we had the construction impact, and we have climbed up to about an average of 62,000 rounds. But up until that point, we were seeing an average decline of 5% a year. And that's pretty much, when we've done the math, that's pretty much where we were. You can see, when we did put some little plugs in there, you can see that in 1991 is when we had the major drought, and you can see the decline in play. It was about a 27% decline in play. And rounds grew up, but never back to the previous level. And then in about the middle of the chart, you can see when Glen Annie opened, and then we have continued to see more of a decline, which as they become priced more equal to what we are, which is what they've been doing, we've been seeing declines in our play. And I'm going to ask Mark if he would give you an overview of the next few slides, as they have to do with the golf course financials.
Thank you, Ms. Rapp. Chair Francisco and council members, Mark Sill, Business Analyst, Parks and Recreation. Pleased to be here to present this to you. So, taking on from what Ms. Rapp has just been talking about, the general overview of golf and what you've seen with the trends at our particular golf course, haven't been looking too healthy over that time period. What we've been looking to do, therefore, is model what we think is going to happen over the next few years and look at some different scenarios with regards to the round volume. Pretty much at a golf course, majority of your costs are fixed. There's not really a lot that you can do if you know that you're going to have 10 fewer players coming today to reduce your costs or anything like that. So in the modelling that we've done, we've taken the assumption that most, if not all, of those costs are fixed with the volume of play. Okay, and so therefore the chart you're seeing with the bars representing the expenses are our estimates as to where we think our expenses are going to go based on the current operating structure of the golf course and the needs for that golf course that we think there will be over the next few years, in particular with regards to capital maintenance. And so therefore what you see is the 4 different colour lines are where do we project the revenues are likely to be based on round volume. So you can see we've taken a range of 2%, which seems to be the top end of people's projections out there where the golf industry might be. And you can see the revenue will grow. Still be a couple of years in FY16 and 17 where it may not quite match the expenses for the course, but that would be a great place to be from a revenue point of view if we could see 2% growth. We've then also modelled with the white line there, what if we see no change in play? And if you refer back to the previous slide, you can see that really towards where we are now, that could be a fair assumption to say, what if it stays around there? So that's where we've modelled our white line. And again, you can see that for 3 years, FY16, 17 and 18, there's still a bit of the bar peaking up over the revenue, which means that we would be running at a loss. We then take a view of if we say, okay, what if we see a 5% drop from FY14, so our actual rounds from last year, what if we see that drop 5% and then remains at that level for the following years? Where do we see our revenue going? And then what do we see a 5% year-on-year decline, which is the average trend? So the other thing to say with regards to the revenue, why is it growing? Well, we've assumed that we would be applying a $1 fee increase to an average round. That's tended to be, on average, the approach that we would have taken. So you can see, therefore, there's a different range of outcomes depending on what you think the market's going to do, and in particular, what you think our course is likely to do. In terms of our expense line, this is just a little bit of analysis that breaks it down a little bit more. You can see that the green or turquoise bars at the bottom here represent how much the course spends on labour. And that's projected to grow quite reasonably over the next few years. Key driver behind that being the cost of benefits and the PERS increases that we're expecting, which really kick in from FY17. That's where we get a big change. So there's no assumption on any extra headcount or anything like that. It's all about what's the cost of employment. In the supplies line here, you've got quite a lot of different things within there. You've got allocated overheads from city departments that support the golf course. You have probably the largest element of that being water. And who knows where that might go depending on, if we don't get the rain where we need it to be this winter. But again, the assumption there is that it would be at similar rates as we're currently paying. And then the top bar here, what kind of tops it off, is how much have we been investing back into our course? And it's fair to say that over the recent years, there's been an inclination to try to put off and delay capital investments because there just simply hasn't been the confidence that there would be the money to fund it all properly. Now, clearly, at some point, that strategy starts to actually damage the golf course in any number of different ways that you can imagine. So within our modelling, it would have been too easy for us to have just said, we won't invest back into this golf course. However, it would put then more and more pressure on our top line and more pressure on our standing in comparison to our competitors. So we've taken a view of what we think the golf course needs and applied that to the projection. And so here's a very brief history in terms of where we are with the reserves being the product of your revenue and your expenses. So we are at the end of FY12, so in end of June 2012, we were required to, by our policies, have $591,000 of available reserves, and we missed that. And you can see we're at $435,000 there, so we were short by $156,000 at the end of FY12. That position actually got a little bit worse the year after, where we actually worsened our position by a further $98,000 when we were short by $254,000. And then, crucially, what's estimated with the books being very close to being closed on FY14, we're estimating that our reserve balance is going to decline further to $276,000, which is a further decline of $38,000. Now, that may seem not too much of a fall, but what I will just sort of say to you that in FY14, we actually saw 2.4% growth in rounds over FY13 and an 11.1% growth in revenue, and still had to use reserves. We can't suggest to you that we're going to grow revenue double-digit every year and still use reserves as a sustainable business model. So here's the projection then, taking that all into account, of what do we think is going to happen to those reserves as we go forward. And so you can see the bars here are representing what the policy reserves are. Much like the general fund tends to grow if the operating budget increases, so does the reserve policy. It's based on that similar principle. And so the challenge gets harder every year. However, we don't seem to get close to our policy reserves unless you can project that we think the rounds are going to grow by 2% or more each year on our current operating model. And so if we start to dip below the zero there, what that means is we've run out of money and we need some more from somewhere to be able to keep going. Okay, so there's the same four scenarios in terms of round volume and what the impact would be on the reserves.
And the golf course has been below policy reserves for the last 8 years. So it's been a growing concern. So we did want to let you know what have we been doing. And a lot of this you are already aware of, so I'm just going to revisit. We have, over the years, been doing strategic pricing, from no fee increases at all to our model, which is generally $1 a year, to sometimes up to a $3 fee increase. We have increased our marketing and promotions significantly. We have become a lot more savvy about our business and what we do. With council's support, we have refinanced our debt twice over the last 5 years. We have reduced our staffing, and this is primarily both administrative and maintenance staff, by 15% We've reduced down 2 full-time positions to a total now of 11.5 FTE. Comparatively, what we know from other studies is our staffing level for golf course maintenance is about on par with others. It's just the cost of that maintenance is different. We have scaled back where we could on capital equipment replacement and major maintenance, but clearly that's not sustainable. And as Mark mentioned, we have very little elasticity in further reducing those expenses without impacting course conditions, which we've also had conversations about. And we did a study, we commissioned a study in 2013 that, knowing that we were heading towards this, we hired a golf consultant to come in and provide some information to us on golf trends, how we compared to other similar golf courses in the region and in the state primarily. And if we were going to look at an alternative model, what would it look like both operationally and financially? It was a good study, and we decided at that point that we weren't quite there to pull the trigger. We were feeling a little bit better about, things looked like they were stabilizing, so we put it on hold. However, we are currently in the process of updating that report with the last 2 years of information. That report had information through 2012. So we are updating that and expect to have it by the end of this month. And I think that we and council will find that a very valuable tool as we go forward. I am going to, as part of this report, share information that was part of that 2013 report, but we'll have updated financial information as we go forward. So we've tried to identify what some of the options might be that we would be taking to council for direction. One, and we'll talk more about each one of these, we could restructure the golf fund debt. We could supplement the golf budget with a general fund subsidy, and we could look at an alternate operating model. One would be simply leaving everything else as is and outsourcing golf course maintenance. Two, another model of golf course management is a long-term facility lease with a private operator. And three, some form of a management agreement. So I will talk about each one of these. We could restructure the golf fund debt. I will say I don't think it will get us where we need to get beyond a couple of years. But just to review what the current situation with the golf fund debt, we have a municipal COP, which was used for the renovation of the clubhouse back, I think, in the late 80s. And that has a payment currently of $180,000 on an annual basis to the golf course, and it's paid off in 2018. Then we have the general fund loan, which was used for our construction costs related to golf course safety improvement plan. The majority of that was funded out of golf course capital reserves, and the balance was funded with a general fund loan, and the balance of that is $500,000. Sorry, that was the original. That's right. We haven't made any payments on that. And so the last debt refinancing, we worked it out so that the consistent payment for the golf course would be approximately $180,000 to $185,000, with the payments through fiscal year 18 going towards paying off the clubhouse COP, and the payments beyond 2018 through fiscal year 22 would go to repay the general fund loan. Additionally, last year we did an equipment loan from the Fleet Replacement Fund. This was to replace all the major turf equipment on the golf course. We had delayed replacement of that equipment to the point that we really needed to have major replacement of that equipment. So that meant that we incurred a debt of $60,000 for 5 years. So we have that through 2018. So if we total that together, we have $262,000 of debt through fiscal year 18 and $185,000 beyond that to fiscal year 22. So since we have capital and equipment replacement needs that continue, it's, we could talk some debt restructuring, but it's not really going to be a long-term answer. Option number 2 is supplementing the golf fund with general fund subsidy. I will say that last year there was a report that was done by the National Golf Foundation that found that more municipal golf courses were in fact being supplemented with general fund support to offset losses in revenue. It was a trend reversing what had been the previous trend, where golf courses were in some communities seen as a way to generate additional revenue to the general fund. And so we don't find ourselves alone in considering this. So in this chart, the red bar is showing what happens if our revenue is a 5% decline year over year, so similar to what the earlier chart showed. We would see our general fund subsidy go from $367,000 in fiscal year 15, and it would increase another $500,000 roughly to $878,000 in fiscal year 17. And so similar, you see those changes. The yellow line is the 5% decline in fiscal year 15, then flat. White is if nothing changes in terms of play, and you can barely see it in 16, but the green is the 2% growth. So all of those just show that the subsidy would increase significantly in out years. Yes.
These are cumulative numbers, not annual numbers. So just need to get on the Sorry, Bob Samario, Finance Director. I'm sure you would have clarified this, but it's just a cumulative number that's growing. Every year it's going to be in the range of $300,000 to $500,000 of a subsidy. The total dollars that would be subsidized by the general fund is represented by each of those lines. So by 2020, for example, the red line would suggest that the general fund would have to given the golf fund over $2.5 million. But an annual number is different than that. So it's just to make sure that's clear on this chart.
Is that correct? Okay. Option 3A is outsourcing golf maintenance. I think that's pretty understandable as a concept. The preliminary estimates in the 2013 study were roughly about $500,000 a year when comparing city operating costs to other courses. But we have the living wage ordinance, which might decrease that. So I'm saying, and we'll see updated numbers, but probably somewhere between $350,000 and $500,000 a year. If we were to go this route, we have made a commitment. We feel that we would not have job loss to existing city golf course maintenance staff. We would make room for them within the city organization, primarily Parks and Recreation, but maybe also other departments that have the grounds maintenance worker title. It would require the city to manage 3 contracts. We currently have 2. And I will tell you that I would think is probably one of the biggest liabilities that the city has had in managing the golf course through the recession and challenging fiscal times. Each one of those concessionaires is concerned about their own bottom line, and most of our competition has one entity using all three of those components to manage their business and choose where their loss leaders will be for promotions and marketing, and it is a disadvantage for us to not have that. And we have really felt that over the last years when we've been struggling to find ways to respond quickly with competitive edge in the community. So for that reason, it's really not recommended by staff as a model, but it could be considered. The facility lease is a less common model in municipalities. It's largely considered for those courses which need extensive capital investment. And in that case, they are doing a long-term lease with some guaranteed revenue back to the city. It is a model that has the least financial risk to the city, but it is also the model that has the least amount of city control for pricing, quality, etc. The management agreement is by far the more common model for municipal courses. It is a contract with a private company to manage the course for a set fee, and then the contract has revenue and performance incentives on top of that. The contracts can be structured in a number of ways. More common is the full management agreement, which is all three entities: the golf course maintenance, food and beverage, and the pro shop. But it can also, the next model, which is more common, is the maintenance and the pro shop, and then having a separate concession with the restaurant. But again, for the previous reasons that I mentioned, if we have the opportunity to go with a full agreement where you have one entity making those decisions. The services, one of the biggest aspects of having a management agreement is that most of these companies they would be providing the services in a consolidated way by professional golf course management. And that would be one of the big takeaways that the city would get. The city does retain the financial risk. It's still our operating budget, our revenue, but we have more control over the pricing and the operation of the course because the management company is managing according to the contract that we would put into place and work with over the year. So next steps, we have met with the golf staff, and I have met with them several times over the years as we have known that this conversation was starting to come up publicly, and my commitment to them is that I would meet with them first, which I did a couple weeks ago, and let them know we were going to start this discussion. We also have informed SEIU of the discussions that are taking place. We are updating the 2013 study, as I mentioned, and look to have that by the end of the month, and we will be going to City Council for direction on November 11th. If we were to consider an alternate operating model, this is why the timing is so critical right now. Our two concession contracts end on June 2016. It takes, in talking to golf course consultants and other cities that have been through this process, we really need to allow 12 months for the RFP, the contract negotiation, and the transition between what we have in place and what we will be going to. That means that we need a council decision on how to proceed no later than May or June of 2015. So in that 6 months, 7 months between now and then, we would anticipate that we would have stakeholder input through April of 2015, including SEIU, the Golf Course Advisory Committee, Parks and Recreation Commission, and bring recommendations to the Finance Committee in April of 2015, and then recommendations to the full council in May or June of 2015. So that's kind of, because of that, that really is why we're talking about this now. And I will just say that our concessionaires are also looking for some direction for what's going to happen, as it has an impact on their businesses. So in summary, the Golf Fund is continuing to have fiscal challenges, and we are concerned for long-term sustainability because of the golf trends, the local market competition, and our revenue and expense projections. We've identified at least 5 possible options. There may be others, and talked about why, if we were going to pursue an alternate model, why it's important to take action now. So with that, I'm happy to have either Mark or I answer any questions for you. And also, it would be helpful if, because we are in the process of developing the report that we would take to City Council, if there's additional information, if you could, additional information that you think would be helpful, let us know. And if we aren't already planning to include that, we will make sure it's included.
Okay. Questions from the committee? Mr. Hart?
The restructuring the debt question, the 6% interest rate stood out, since that seems like an anomaly from a past interest rate environment. So is that where the biggest savings come from? The 3% loan for the equipment, I think, is kind of close to where interest rates are compared to cities' revenue on investments. But the 6% seems like a holdover from past time. Is that where you're going to refinance that debt to something lower? Is that?
Chair Francisco and Councilmember Hart, I think the impact of reducing that interest rate from 6%, even way down to, say, 2-3%, whilst that would help, it would still be a very small
It's
element.
in like the $20,000
It's
number.
It's the principal payment that's the major element of the cash flow, which would be a concern. So if it were to happen, it may only be a difference of sort of $10,000 a year at most.
Okay. Let me think. I got a million questions, but I don't even know where to start. So they're not rationally connected. But how does the restaurant do separately from the other trends?
Well, in general, because we have a very successful businessman, Mario Medina and Mulligan's have basically grown that food and beverage concession from what it was when the golf course operated in the early days, which was a simple get a drink and a burger or a hot dog, to now being a full restaurant that is well known in the community, and I would say a good portion of their business is the non-golfing community. And so, and he's a very savvy businessman, so he is actually doing very well in that location and would have interest in staying.
Is that revenue part of what we're talking about?
We do, Councilmember Hart, to be clear, that revenue is part of what we're talking about, meaning?
Well, in the sense of, it's all part of the enterprise fund. It's revenue that goes to the enterprise fund. It doesn't go to the general fund. So it's basically helping to subsidize the declining traditional golf revenue problem.
We get a concession, right now we get a concession fee, which is part of our golf revenue, but it's fairly small. The majority, I think it's like close to 90% or more of our revenue is greens fee revenue, and a much smaller proportion is the concession revenue. If, in fact, we change to a model with a full management agreement, then all of the revenues would come in and be part of the golf course operating revenues.
But just for my context understanding, it's a relatively small percentage again, too. So it's not like that you could have explosive growth in the success. Even he was even more successful to have that make a big dent in the curve.
I can give you some rough numbers. In the most recent year, the greens fee revenue was about 1.7 million. Okay. And the revenue that was generated from the restaurant from the city's point of view was about 140,000.
Okay.
And then the other concession for the pro shop is about $160,000. So the two concessions combined are about 300,000 there or thereabouts, and the green fee revenue is about 1.6, 1.7, getting us towards our 2 million total city revenue.
I see. Okay, well, that's the only questions, right?
Any questions, Mr. White?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. And I have no questions either. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
I do have some comments, though.
Oh, please, go ahead.
Going forward, first of all, it's clear that the general fund has been called upon to help keep the golf course together, keep the club going, and all that kind of thing. And so, it's not like we're considering whether the general fund should support it. It has been supporting it for quite some time, and and obviously we're not seeing turnarounds, then it's definitely a reckoning. We experienced other reckonings recently with the recession, and we managed to at least sort of hang on by our fingernails with this one, and then the contracts, the concession contracts are coming due. So this clearly is a key point in examining the whole thing. Going forward, I'm very interested in even visiting what the models that staff would think are the good models to be looking at, where other cities or other jurisdictions. I imagine there are counties or regions or other entities that have these courses. But I sure would appreciate getting as good of a feel for that as we can, both physically and obviously with the numbers as well, and making sure, of course, that the course is being well maintained, and all that kind of good stuff, and that prices aren't through the roof. That's obviously a key area that we have run into on the Las Positas tennis issue was cost, and so it's obviously really important that be part of the conversation, and that we have a sense of how that would proverbially play out. But obviously, it's an uncomfortable situation we're finding ourselves in. What are the next steps? And you're saying coming back to council?
So what we would envision for next steps would be we would be at council on November 11th.
Okay.
And
Couple weeks.
we would really be looking for out of that is, if council is seriously wanting to look at alternate operating models, then we would initiate that process of review and input from the Golf Course Advisory Committee, the Parks and Recreation Commission, series of public meetings, outreach to golfers, all of that. The information that we will be bringing to you, updating of the 2013 study, will include the information that you mentioned, Councilmember White. So you will have the financial comparison of how those operations, and I would also say that probably for us, the closest model of the full management agreement would be the City of Ventura and their two courses, which were recently renovated and operating very effectively under contract. So that's probably the closest model. But all of that information will be included and shown in the report that we bring to you.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Actually, I guess I'm going to get all my questions answered while we have more time.
Mr.
here.
Hart.
So, my comments, I guess, I'm not inherently opposed to changing the relationship of an enterprise fund, recreation enterprise fund, to the general fund, just as a principle. I don't have any problem with that philosophically. Obviously, it made sense to have it be an enterprise fund when it was a profitable thing because the money stayed there and got reinvested. The whole premise, I think, of a public golf course is to have low-cost recreation available to its residents. So I would be concerned about, privatizing this in a way that basically undermines that premise. If the point is to make, to hand this off to a private business that's going to make money so that we don't have to subsidize it, the price of golf is going to go up. And I don't know I think that's just an absolute policy question for the council. Do we want to have golf available for local residents at a lower cost than would be available from the private sector? And given that there's a lot of private sector golf courses out there charging private sector prices, I don't know how that adds any value to a city resident as compared to subsidizing golf. We have to decide if that form of recreation for residents is worthy of subsidy, just like any other form of recreation for city residents. I don't see it any differently just because it's golf. We don't apply the same standards to any of the other recreation programs. Obviously, we try and raise as much revenue as we can, but there aren't enterprise funds for Los Baños Pool, for the tennis courts, for all of the other things. So to me, it is really kind of the same thing and should be looked at in that context. How much are we spending for other recreation programs and how many residents are using them and why, what's the dollar cost per unit of fun? And so that's a lot of information, and I don't know if you were prepared to get into that, but to me, it's just completely important contextually to understand that, what are we subsidizing, what are we not subsidizing? And then in terms of just, doing the outsourcing of the golf course maintenance, that's another value choice. We can get it cheaper by having a private sector employer pay people substandard wages. We have a floor with the living wage ordinance, but as you said, that kind of mitigates against that, but I don't know that's in conflict with other values, so we have to look at that carefully as well. So this is an interesting dilemma, and I'm glad you're bringing it early, but it isn't really early in the context of the time that's necessary to make these decisions. So as much information as you can have about these contexts, maybe even if it's helpful to you to have more time to have those contextual conversations here in the Finance Committee where we maybe have more time, I'm certainly interested in knowing a lot about that. I can do that offline too. I can meet with you and just have a lot of those questions answered if my colleagues don't require that. But I don't know how I could make a decision about this or even tell you, because I think what you're looking for is a gatekeeper decision on the 11th. You're saying, do you want to go forward down this path and ask everybody else their opinion or not? And I think that's the threshold question, and that has to be answered in the context of what we're doing with other recreation programs.
So, Councilmember Hart, just to respond, staff has the conversation about the value of golf as a community recreation, and we believe in the municipal golf course. And so we are not having conversations about what if the golf course went away or anything. So whatever structure we would go forward with, the priority would be how that golf course continues to serve as a municipal golf course. We can, your question on what level of subsidy is provided to other recreation programs, we actually can put that together. We actually have done some analysis on that over the years, so we can do that, and I think that that's good information to have. The timing of next steps, we're open to Council and Finance Committee direction on that.
Okay. If there are no further comments or questions, thank you very much, Ms. Rapp.
I thought that was a question from Ms. Rapp about what we want to do next. What do we want to talk about?
Oh, okay. It sounded rhetorical to me, but go ahead and respond.
Is it a question, or are you framing the debate?
Well,
Not on the microphone.
Okay.
Sorry.
We will have the report that will provide the meat and potatoes for the analysis of what would it look like for the city of Santa Barbara under each of those models. And I think that's really what you're looking for. If, in fact, you would like that report with that substantial information to come to the Finance Committee before we go to the full council, we can easily do that. And that, if Finance Committee, that would be a way for you to have a more of a discussion and deliberation of the different models or what it would look like. We could do that. So it's really however you would like to.
Well, I, for one, would appreciate that. I think that's useful, but that's me.
No,
That'd be fine with me.
yeah, me too.
Okay. We'll do
Yeah,
that. We will have the report by the end of the month, and then we'll plan to bring that back and build on this conversation today but with more substantive analysis.
And I do have.
Please, Mr. White.
And the notion of what those rounds cost is an important one, and I'm sure for all concerned. It's just what is a golfer going to have to pay? Again, as I say, we ran in, we just hearken to Las Positas, now bring it over to the golf course. That cost is a core element. So then, as we're talking about the course management in Ventura, obviously, how have those rates done through however long they've been? Is it maybe the renovations were part of the transition from municipal employment to contract? Not sure, but anyway, that would be good information to have to work with.
Sure.
Okay. I think that was the end. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.